All right, then there's Maryland, the second great border state. Maryland's secession would isolate Washington, D.C., obviously. It would surround Washington, D.C., make it impossible to govern there. And there, in Maryland, Lincoln took, as I said, in Kentucky, Lincoln held back. In Maryland, Lincoln took very direct action. He suspended the writ of habeas. As soon as those riots took place, he ordered the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus along the railroad line from going through Maryland to Washington. Now, what does it mean to suspend the writ of habeas corpus? We will hear that phrase many times during the Civil War. Many people have heard the writ of habeas corpus, which goes back many centuries in Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, basically says you cannot be arrested and held without a charge. If the government is going to arrest you, they've got to charge you with a crime. I mean, they can investigate you, but they can't hold you very long without a criminal charge. They can't just round up people and hold them. Suspending the writ of habeas corpus means the government can just chuck you in jail without a charge. I mean, like in Guantanamo, for example. Most of those people don't have a charge against them, really, or certainly not put on trial. They're just there. Well, Lincoln suspends the writ of habeas corpus, allowing the army to just arrest people. Now, why? Because there are saboteurs, there are people putting bombs, or not bombs, dynamite at railroad bridges, trying to disrupt the passage of troops. Civil courts are still operating in Kentucky, in Maryland, but the army doesn't feel they're efficient enough, and they're a secessionist, so they just want to round up people they accuse of sabotage and throw them in jail and throw away the key and not be bothered with trying them. So this leads to one of the early famous cases where a saboteur, Merriman, is arrested by the army, gets a writ of habeas corpus from Chief Justice Taney, who is a Marylander, right? And acting as a Maryland judge, Taney issues an order for the release of Merriman. Lincoln ignores the order. He just says, forget it, I don't have to listen to this guy. First of all, Taney has been totally discredited by the Dred Scott decision, so nobody really cares what he says much. But so here, Lincoln is acting very vigorously. Troops occupy Maryland, and by the fall, a new government is elected. In the fall elections in Maryland, a new, very pro-union government is elected in Maryland. Partly because Union soldiers are guarding the polls. Northern soldiers are voting in this election. And in fact, the new legislature elected in the fall appropriates money to compensate the families of those soldiers who have been killed in the first days of the Civil War. So here it's really martial law almost, which is making sure that Maryland stays in the Union. And of course, if Maryland stays in the Union, there's not much chance of Delaware leaving, because Delaware is just a tiny little place stuck over in the corner. Is anyone here from Delaware? I don't mean to say anything bad about Delaware. I don't really like Delaware much because, no, there's nothing against them, but first of all, what kind of state has a blue hen as a motto, it's weird, a symbol. But no, if you drive to Washington on Route 95, you pass through Delaware for about 10 minutes, and they charge you an arm and a leg for the privilege of driving for 10 minutes through their state. That's how they balance their state budget, so no one outside of Maryland. Anyway, they couldn't secede if Maryland seceded. Anyway, then the final border state where Lincoln is not nearly as successful is Missouri. Missouri, which is out in the west there, and again, divided. A slave state with a radical pro-slavery group. Remember, they've been fighting in Kansas. Missourians have been going over in Kansas to manipulate elections, and there was a civil war in Kansas in which Missourians took part. It also had a big industrial city, St. Louis. It had a significant German immigrant population, which were quite anti-slavery and pro-union. Basically, Missouri is a state where pro and anti-slavery or pro and anti-secession groups start arming themselves very quickly, and basically a sort of civil war breaks out in Missouri, which lasts for 4 years. The whole national civil war takes place along with an internal civil war in Missouri, where the Union controls the state but can never really get complete control. There are Confederate guerrilla bands operating. It's not really a pitched battle. It's more these kind of outlaws and guerrillas. And of course, you know, as you may know, the most famous bandit of that period, Jesse James, comes out of this Civil War in Missouri. He's leading a pro-Confederate band of, you know, guerrillas who go and assault, attack anti-slavery settlers and things like that. And then when the war is over and most of these guys stop, Jesse James turns his attention to robbing banks, a more lucrative practice for a while. But now, the point about the border, I guess, is this. By the fall, the border states are fairly secure for the Union. They're not going to join the Confederacy. They're all governed by pro-Union administrations. But the Unionists there themselves are divided between anti-slavery and pro-slavery groups. And so a political battle will take place in the border, and we will see this, over slavery. Not over the Union so much anymore, but over slavery. And as the rest of the government moves toward abolition, you get more and more resistance and resentment among the Union governments of the border states. And eventually they split, they break up, and new people rise to power. Certainly in Missouri and Maryland that happens. And you get internal revolutions. You get slavery's abolished, as we'll see in Maryland by 1864. A new group comes to power, not the old pro-slavery. So the border is very complicated, but Lincoln manages, apart from Missouri, to manage the situation. And then finally, there is, as we said, West Virginia. Let's go back to our little map here. You can just see where West Virginia is and how strategically located it is. It doesn't actually become a state until early 1863, but it has sort of seceded off from Virginia at the beginning of the war. West Virginia stretches all the way up into the Ohio-Pennsylvania area. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, a critical link east-west, passes through West Virginia. That's very strategic. And they establish, at first what they do, they hold a convention and they declare themselves the legitimate government of Virginia. And Lincoln recognizes the West Virginia government as the legitimate government of Virginia. The government of Virginia has sort of abdicated its responsibility. Then a year later they decide, no, they want to be their own state. And this is where the first action, really, of the Civil War takes place. The governor of Virginia sent troops up into West Virginia to try to cut the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad line. And they were opposed by a group led by, I don't even know what his rank was at the moment. He wasn't a general quite yet, but George B. McClellan, who we'll hear a lot about in a minute. McClellan, an engineer, actually, an engineering graduate of West Point, a railroad engineer in the 1850s, a military commander now as a graduate of West Point of a unit up in West Virginia, and an organizational genius. McClellan will eventually become the leading general in the East for a while and will mold the Army of the Potomac into a real fighting force. Because remember, I said last time at the beginning it isn't. But also had a tremendous capacity for self-aggrandizement and public relations. After repelling this Confederate incursion in a battle called Philippi, named after some old Greek, something in ancient history, he issued a proclamation to his men and the press. He said, "Soldiers of the Army of the West, you have annihilated two forces," not true. "You've annihilated two forces commanded by educated soldiers, entrenched in mountain fastnesses," etc. He issues a press release about how great his men have been and how they've defeated two armies, which is a bit of an exaggeration. But anyway, McClellan will play a role, very important role, in a minute, as we will see.